They say deep inside the royal palace of Madrid, hidden behind velvet curtains and silver candlelight, lies one of the strangest secrets in European history. It's not a crown, not a jewel, not even a relic of a saint. It's something far more intimate, the preserved genitals of a king floating in alcohol. The story sounds absurd, but for over 200 years, whispers in the corridors of Spain's monarchy have insisted it's true, not as a curiosity, but as a symbol of how a once mighty empire collapsed under the weight of one man's insecurities, King Ferdinand VII. To understand how it came to this, you have to look beyond the jar and into the life of a monarch so paranoid, so cowardly, and so desperate to prove his masculinity, he made betrayal and cruelty his ruling principles. Ferdinand was born in 1784 into a Spain that had already begun its decline. The once dominant empire had lost its grip on the Americas. The navy had been shattered by Britain. The economy was a mess, and Napoleon's France was casting a long shadow across the Iberian Peninsula. Even as a child, Ferdinand stood out, not for bravery, but for weakness. He feared confrontation, he plotted in the dark. And most of all, he loathed his father, King Charles IV. By his late 20s, Ferdinand was secretly writing to Napoleon himself, asking for help to overthrow his own parents. This would be the first betrayal. It wouldn't be the last. In 1808, Ferdinand got what he wanted, the throne. But it lasted barely 2 months. Napoleon, playing the Spanish royal family like pieces on a board, summoned both Ferdinand and his father to Bayonne, France. There, in a humiliating scene etched into history, Ferdinand surrendered the crown not to his father, but to Napoleon's brother, Joseph Bonaparte. In return, Ferdinand asked for a pension and a castle in France. While Spain bled, while guerrilla fighters were slaughtered in the mountains resisting French occupation, their king was lounging in French salons, drinking champagne, playing the guitar, entertaining ladies. He lived as a guest of the enemy while his country burned. It was during this gilded exile that the first quiet rumors began, not just about betrayal, but about something more personal. French diplomatic cables whispered about the king's delicate nature. Some questioned whether Ferdinand was even capable of fathering children. Not in a metaphorical sense, but in the most literal one. His cowardice was political, but now it seemed also physical. And as his reputation crumbled, Ferdinand didn't fight to restore honor. He returned in 1814 not as a liberator, but as a man carrying a broken mirror of royal dignity. And things were only going to get darker. Spain, desperate for stability after years of war, greeted Ferdinand like a savior. They called him El Deseado, the desired one. It was perhaps the greatest misunderstanding in the nation's political history. Ferdinand's first act upon returning to power was brutal. He abolished the Constitution of 1812, a document crafted in his absence that had introduced Spain's most progressive liberal ideals. He reinstalled absolute monarchy and unleashed a wave of repression so savage it made enemies out of his former allies. Political opponents vanished, the prisons filled, censorship tightened like a noose. But it was in his personal life where Ferdinand's darkest anxieties emerged. He married 4 times. The first 3 ended without heirs, and with a rising chorus of ridicule from across Europe. His first wife, Maria Antonia of Naples, died childless after 4 years of marriage. Some whispered it had never been consummated. His second wife, Isabel of Braganza, was young, beautiful, and intelligent, but also died without producing a child. His third, Maria Josepha of Saxony, endured 7 years of fruitless attempts to conceive. Prayers were offered, doctors summoned, pilgrimages made, all to no avail. Behind palace doors, the rumors sharpened. Foreign diplomats wrote with unusual directness the King of Spain might be physically incapable of having children. That failure wasn't just personal, it was dynastic. And for a man obsessed with power, that was worse than treason. By the late 1820s, Ferdinand had become the object of open mockery among Europe's elite. Satirical pamphlets circulated in Madrid, joking about his impotence. Some claimed he had been born with genital deformities. Others hinted at a disease or injury that had rendered him sterile. The pressure mounted not only on Ferdinand, but on the monarchy itself. Spain needed an heir. The absence of a son threatened a succession crisis. The king, now visibly aging and deteriorating in health, faced the collapse of everything he stood for. In 1829, at 45 years old, Ferdinand entered into a final desperate marriage. His fourth wife was Maria Cristina of Bourbon, his niece, 23 years his junior. The match was not born of affection, but of urgency. If he couldn't produce an heir now, Spain risked civil war. To everyone's shock, Maria Cristina became pregnant almost immediately. In 1830, she gave birth to Princess Isabella. 2 years later, another daughter followed, Luisa Fernanda. After decades of humiliation, Ferdinand had children, but the relief was short-lived. They were girls. In the eyes of many, including the powerful Carlist faction, only a male heir could preserve the legitimacy of the Bourbon line. Whispers returned with venom. Were the girls truly Ferdinand's? Had the Queen taken a lover? Or had medicine, prayers, or something far more artificial made conception possible? Instead of silencing the rumors, the births only deepened them. And Ferdinand, already paranoid, became obsessed. As the final years of Ferdinand's life unfolded, his obsession with his own masculinity turned manic. He was no longer just a disliked monarch. He was a man at war with his own body, terrified of what it said about him. Medical records from the royal archives describe how he constantly consulted doctors about his virility. He demanded treatments to improve his sexual performance, as if proving himself in bed could redeem decades of failure as king. He swallowed powders made from crushed rhinoceros horn. He drank elixirs brewed from exotic plants. He commissioned physicians to import rare aphrodisiacs from the American colonies. If something promised potency, he tried it. But none of it gave him what he truly wanted: validation. Every political insult, every public criticism, he interpreted not as a challenge to his rule, but to his manhood. And he responded with increasing cruelty. Critics were exiled, tortured, or disappeared. His temper swung from morose silence to explosive rage. Ferdinand, always insecure, had become a man consumed by fear. Fear that history would remember him not as a king, but as a joke. Fear that even in death, his legacy would be mocked for what he lacked, not what he had done. In truth, Spain was no longer afraid of him. They were exhausted by the repression, the instability, the grotesque spectacle of a monarch unraveling in public. And behind the palace doors, something even stranger was being prepared. In September 1833, Ferdinand's body began to fail in ways even his paranoia couldn't ignore. He suffered from gout, kidney failure, and likely advanced diabetes. He could barely walk. His swollen limbs and decaying teeth left him bedridden for weeks. But even as death approached, his fixation on virility deepened. Feverish and trembling, he demanded reports from his doctors about his reproductive health. He insisted on more treatments, more potions. He spoke of heirs as if he still had time. His court, weary and grim, watched in silence as the king spiraled into delusion. Then came the decision that would turn Ferdinand from a disgraced monarch into a whispered legend. According to multiple accounts, hidden in archives, Scrawled in personal letters and repeated in palace gossip, Ferdinand issued an astonishing order as his organs began to shut down. He demanded that, after his death, one part of his anatomy be preserved, not his heart, not his brain, his genitals. Why? The theories vary. Some say he believed it would prove he was a true man after all. Others say it was an act of morbid defiance, a final gesture to silence his enemies. Or perhaps it was just madness. What's more unsettling is that the order was reportedly carried out. After Ferdinand's death, servants removed the organ, placed it in a glass jar, and sealed it in alcohol. And so, a monarch's final legacy wasn't a statue, a reform, or a victory, but a relic, hidden in the palace, too obscene for display. No official records confirm the preservation of Ferdinand's genitals. No inventory lists it. No plaque marks its resting place, but the rumors would not die. Over the decades, whispers spread through the corridors of power. Servants passed the tale to their sons. Diplomats mentioned it in letters with cautious phrasing. A few claimed to have seen the jar themselves, tucked away in a dark crypt beneath the royal palace, next to forgotten relics of Spanish royalty. Whether the relic truly existed or not became almost irrelevant. The story itself had power. It became a symbol, grotesque, pathetic, unforgettable. A man so tormented by his own inadequacies that even in death he could not let go of the one thing he feared defined him. Ferdinand VII was remembered not for rebuilding Spain, not for reforms, not even for betrayal, but for an anatomical trophy sealed in glass. And yet, the story of the jar is more than macabre rumor. It captures something essential about the man and his reign. A king obsessed not with service, but with ego. Not with nationhood, but with legacy. Not with honor, but with proof. Spain had endured centuries of war, conquest, empire. And in the end, the man meant to lead them into renewal left behind nothing but scandal, resentment, and shame. The empire had crumbled, and at its center had stood a king consumed by the fear of not being man enough to hold it together. Ferdinand's death in 1833 did not bring peace to Spain, only confusion and conflict. With no surviving sons, succession passed to his daughter Isabella, still a toddler. But not everyone accepted a female monarch. His brother Carlos claimed the throne for himself, insisting that no woman could rule Spain. Thus began the Carlist Wars, brutal, bloody conflicts that tore the country apart for decades. The seeds of that civil war had been planted by Ferdinand himself, long before his death. Had he produced a clear male heir, the question of succession might have been simple. Instead, his indecision, paranoia, and erratic policy left a fragile monarchy vulnerable to collapse. The irony was sharp. After a lifetime obsessed with proving his masculinity, Ferdinand's failure to secure a male line plunged his nation into chaos, a legacy of blood, not strength. Inside the palace, his former allies scrambled to protect the child queen. Outside, the country splintered. Carlists rallied in the north, liberals and moderates split in the cities. And as the fighting intensified, the memory of Ferdinand lingered. Not as a hero or a martyr, but as a cautionary tale. Even in death, he cast a long, anxious shadow. And through it all, the story of the jar persisted, as if Spain itself couldn't forget what its king had chosen to preserve and what he'd ultimately lost. As Spain spiraled into civil unrest, historians and courtiers alike struggled with how to remember Ferdinand. Official portraits showed him in regal poses, robes, crown, sword, symbols of power he never truly earned. But beyond the paintings, a darker image had taken root. Among the political elite, the tale of the preserved organ was repeated with a mixture of discomfort and fascination. Some used it as a metaphor, a grotesque reflection of how far the Spanish crown had fallen. Others treated it like scandalous folklore, retold in hushed voices over brandy in aristocratic salons. Writers and satirists, particularly from outside Spain, found in Ferdinand a figure ripe for ridicule. He was the failed monarch who betrayed his father, surrendered his throne, and became obsessed with his own manhood as his empire collapsed. In France and Britain, he was portrayed in caricatures as bloated, insecure, half king, half fool. The more scandalous journals even published suggestive sketches of the infamous jar, mocking both the man and the monarchy he left behind. But while Europe laughed, Spain bled. The Carlist wars dragged on, with no clear victor. The country remained fractured, its royal legacy poisoned by decades of mistrust. And at the center of it all lay Ferdinand, a man who had feared history would forget him, yet ensured it would never look away. His body was buried in royal tombs, but his myth remained preserved in rumor. Nearly 2 centuries later, the name Ferdinand VII evokes little pride in Spain. He is not honored with grand avenues or triumphant statues. His reign is remembered instead as an era of failure, of betrayal, repression, and national humiliation. But the story of the jar still lingers. Modern historians debate its truth. Some dismiss it as palace gossip spun into legend. Others quietly admit there's just enough documentation, just enough silence in the official records to make it plausible. A jar, a relic, a secret buried deep beneath the royal stones of Madrid. And perhaps that's the most fitting end for Ferdinand. He lived obsessed with legacy, but left none worth celebrating. He feared being seen as weak and ensured he'd be remembered only for weakness. He ruled a kingdom, but couldn't master himself. Spain survived him, but barely. The empire that once spanned continents shrank into turmoil. His obsession with virility didn't protect his throne, it ignited a war. His daughters would rule, but under siege. His memory, etched not in gold or marble, but in a whispered grotesque. Somewhere in a crypt, they say, a jar remains, sealed, suspended, forgotten, but never entirely. And whether it holds truth or myth, one thing is certain. No other king in Europe left behind something so human, so fragile, and so tragically revealing. A body may die, an empire may fall, but shame lasts.